So, as I just said, they feel like they're on their way. This is the climax of the text, and they're on their way in order to figure out what's going on. Poole has not done a good job of being able to tell Utterson what the problem is. All he says is he suspects foul play, he suspects there's a crime. And when they get there, one of the big things is all of the staff are there. There's a large number of servants just waiting by the fire when Utterson gets there. And when Utterson does get there, some people are like, oh, thank God Utterson is here, right? Somebody is here in order to resolve the situation. One of the things that it's important to talk about in terms of the context of this book is we've noticed that there's this thing called a class divide, right, throughout the text. And in the class divide, right, the upper class is the class in charge, right? I mean, there's no doubts to that. And so the thing is even though Poole is a butler, he's a grown man, and most of these servants are grown adults. A lot of them are not literate, right? A lot of them, when we say they're not literate, a lot of them, that means you can read, right? A lot of them, so they're illiterate, right? They cannot read, right? And a lot of them just don't know what to do. And in this sense of they don't know what to do, in the sense of the class divide, right, with the upper class being in charge, one of the things that is very common in this society is you'll notice that, like in the military, you know how you have the enlisted people and the officers? The people who make all the decisions are the officers, and officers come from the upper class. So when Utterson shows up at the house, right, it's almost like an adult has shown up. Someone who can be in charge. Because even though these are servants of Dr. Jekyll, who some of them probably worked for him for years, they don't feel like it's their place, right, to be able to make a decision or to take decisive action in this situation. And part of it's because of the divide of education, but part of this idea of class divide, and it's a very, very important thing, particularly in the British class system, the idea that people should know their place, right? They're not supposed to act above their station, right? This idea becomes a pretty serious idea within the culture because they need to do something. Something needs to be done. Something serious is going on. But because they're not in the upper class, because they're servants, they're not a member of this ruling upper class, they don't feel like they have the authority to make a decision. And if they do make a decision, they're likely to get in trouble for going above their station and not knowing their place. So they're getting Mr. Utterson. It's almost like, you know, people are glad, oh, somebody is here who can be in charge. Somebody is here who can understand what they need to be doing right now. And so it makes the remark that some of the female servants are hysterical, right? If you're not familiar with the term hysterical, I want to give some Victorian context to this word. So it means out of control emotion, right? Right. It can be anxiety, it can be fear, it can be sorrow. But the idea of hysterical is out of control emotion. And in Victorian society, this was only applied to the female sex, right? It was believed that only women could be hysterical, right? In fact, and it's interesting because this history of women being hysterical, or them believing women as being the more emotional of humans, you can still see the root of hysterical being related to the female anatomy in the term for what happens when a woman has a surgical procedure to get her uterus removed. If you didn't know, the procedure for a woman when she has her uterus removed is called a hysterectomy. And so this idea of hysteria and this idea of, you know, being overwhelmed by emotion, this was very much assumed to be a female problem or a female characteristic. I share this with you not because it's true, but because it's just kind of, this indicates the view of it indicates the view of the Victorian era. Poole is also very much out of sorts. It talks about how Poole is jangled, right? Which, you know, can mean rattled, right? Jangled means rattled, but it's usually it means shaken, right? But the key of jangle, it's usually referring to some kind of metallic object, right? Like the jangling of keys, right? Making a clinking sound. Um, but it simply means shaken. But the difference is the reason why pool is jangled while the female servants are hysterical is supposedly because the men are more quiet, right? They're just trembling in fear silently. Somehow they're less overwhelmed than the women. Again, this is a pretty sexist view, but just illustrates kind of the period in which Robert Louis Stevenson is writing. And so when Utterson shows up, right, the idea is, okay, like an adult is here. Whatever the problem is, we will get it taken care of, right? And he uses a phrase, and this is this other one of those again very unusual phrases. This is definitely one of those 18th or 19th century phrases. He says, "We'll get this through hands at once," right? That just means dealt with, right? Through hands meaning we'll take care of it, we'll handle it, right? So when we say through hands, right, it's literally the exact same allusion as saying we'll handle it, right? We'll put hands on it. If you hadn't made that connection. And so we know, right, that Utterson is going to ask what's going on, and Poole is going to try to explain the situation. But basically what's going to happen is he's talking about how things have been going very badly, right? That the doctor hasn't come out of his room, he hasn't seen anybody, and this has been going on now for more than a week, right? It refers to someone being peevish, right? If you're, or, peevishly, right? Someone who's peevish is easily irritated, right? By unimportant things usually. So right now, like everyone is on edge, right? And what's going on? And Poole says that the voice that he has been hearing from inside the laboratory is not the voice of Henry Jekyll. And all the servants are gathered together. And one of the things that's really important to understand with all the servants being gathered together, they seem to all be of the same opinion. They seem to all be of the opinion that Dr. Jekyll is not there, that maybe he's dead, but he's not in the house. They do not believe that the voice that they have been hearing through the door is the voice of Dr. Jekyll. And another point is that most of the servants normally would have gone home at this point. They've probably had a meeting. And they're all worried, and they all don't know what to do. And they probably made the decision to send Poole out to get Utterson, to get an adult, almost, someone who will know what to do, because they're also afraid of getting in trouble. If they were to do what Utterson's going to do, right, smash through the door with the axe, right, who knows what kind of things that they could do. So anyway, Poole says that the voice that he's hearing from inside the lab, right, people are, leaving meals by the door, and someone's getting it out when no one's looking. And basically, eventually, right, he sees someone in that space in between the houses, like that kind of back lawn area. He says the person's wearing a mask. And so why would, him wearing a mask? And Utterson is still trying to apply the most generous possible interpretation of events, right? And so Utterson says, well, maybe he has some kind of malady, right, that is afflicting him both of body and mind, right? Like, for example, maybe he has some kind of disease which is causing his physical form to deteriorate, hence him wearing a mask. And maybe it's also affecting his mind as well. There are some diseases that can affect a person quite seriously, both mentally and physically. And for example, one of the most common of that diseases would have been syphilis, right? And syphilis, if you don't know, it's an STD. It's a sexually transmitted disease. It's very, very common at the time, and it can cause rotting of the body in different places, and it also can cause a person to go mad. So it was one of the more feared of those kinds of diseases of the STDs, which is, again, that's again a pretty common. And the other reason, right, is it's a sin. It's a disease that we get from vice, right? That's one of the other reasons why this disease might be hinted at in this particular text. But the thing is Poole says this person who he saw who ran away from him, he said, why would Dr. Jekyll ever run away from me in fear? He wouldn't. But the main thing that he writes is And he says he describes the person he saw wearing a mask as being dwarfish. And this is a huge hint because of all the things, right? It's very difficult for people to describe Edward Hyde. But the one thing that everyone agrees upon for Hyde is that even though they can't talk about the way he's deformed, right? They have difficulty discussing what makes him ugly or what makes him look unnatural. The one thing that we know about Hyde is he's short and he's smaller. That's the one thing that everyone can agree upon. And so this is going to be, again, the part of the hints of what's going to go on. And so Utterson, right, in hearing this, he's going to start giving orders and he is going to start taking charge and he's going to start putting things in hand. He doesn't really know what's going on, but he's going to find out because clearly something is going on. So he gives orders not only to Poole, who's the butler, he also gives orders to this person called the knife boy. If you don't know what a knife boy is, a knife boy just means a subservient. It means a lower servant who does what we call the menial tasks in the household, right? The unimportant, uncritical tasks, the tasks that are tedious, maybe nobody else wants to do. And so the reason why he's called a knife boy is one job that generally no one in the house wants to do because it takes a long time and it can be really boring is knife sharpening, right? So he's the knife boy, but he doesn't just take care of the knives. He probably also polishes the boots and dusts and he just does whatever lower odd job that's unimportant that doesn't need to be taken care of. And Utterson's going to say, all right, well, we're going to find out who's in the lab. And he says, and if it turns out that nothing has gone wrong, that this is all perfectly innocent, right? He says about his shoulders, my shoulders are broad enough to bear the burden. And what this means is he says, I can take responsibility for whatever happens, right? And he can do this because he is the Jekyll's lawyer and his power of attorney, right? If anything bad happens, like if something is damaged, he can pay for it. And he's not likely to be punished by the police because he's a member of the upper class, right? The idea is frequently people in the lower classes are not empowered, right? And this is, again, the class division. They need Utterson there to be able to make a decision to make sure what is done legally. And he begins to take drastic action. And the thing is they don't even bother to call the police or anything. He orders the other servants, right? The footman, right? He orders the footman and the knife boy. He's like, all right, go around the front. We're coming in the back. And he tells them to get good sticks, right? When he says good sticks, right, he means clubs, right? Weapons, right? Get sticks that can do some damage, right? And whoever they're in, he already suspects it's Mr. Hyde. They're going to go in and they're going to find out. So, they're going to find, who is the malefactor who may be inside, right? Malefactor simply means evildoer, right? So, the term malicious comes from evil. If you remember the last phrase in the Lord's Prayer, it's sed libera nos a malo, right? Malo means evil. So you can see, right, this term malo, meaning evil, right? You can see it in the term malicious, right? You can see it in the term malefactor, right? You even see it earlier in that other term, malady, right? We see we see the etymology at work, and they're going to go and they are going to figure out what's going on. And they do a really good job explaining the atmosphere, right? It talks about the scud, right? Scud are clouds that move quickly across the sky. So the idea here, now that they have the moon and the wind and the clouds are moving across the sky, everything is being led to the climax. Everything is being talked about to build atmospheric tension, right? And that is what they're going to say. And they're going to say, look, and they go to the door, right? He tells Poole to get a heavy iron poker, right, which is basically just a large iron rod with a point at the end of it, a large weapon, an iron club. And he gets an axe, right? He gets an axe, and they're going to break in. They're going to break in, and they are going to find out what's going on. They're going to find out who's in there, and they're going to make an end of it one way or another.